Hello, Jeff Minier with Shiloh Baptist Church of Bowie, Maryland, as we continue our devotions in the Advent season. This is week 2. Our first candle was the prophet's candle, waiting for God to move. Our second candle is called the Bethlehem candle, where we focus on those whom God was preparing to bring Messiah into the world. Today we look at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Not only does America put their presidents on their dollar bills, fives, tens, hundreds, but many cultures, many countries through the ages have put their kings on their coins. There's a sense of wanting to make a statement of how important you are. When you're a king at the time, you have your image stamped on. I don't believe any of our presidents have ever had their own picture put on our currency while they were alive, but it is often a statement of those who we respect, those who we appreciate, who have led well. Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, that's different from the Bethlehem up in Zebulun, it's the Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who is born, King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them, "Where is the Messiah to be born?" "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for it is written from the prophet Micah, 'But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel.'" Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go, make a careful search for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I, too, may go and worship him." After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their gifts and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Preparing the great. Recently, President Obama had an interview with Oprah, and as I just saw one little piece of it, he says, yeah, to run to be a president, you have to have a certain amount of megalomania about you. I've heard that from other commenters on what it takes to put yourself forward to be the president. I'm not bringing that up as a positive or a negative, but what we often see happens, even with people of far less title than president, is that as one gets authority in their hands, sometimes they can feel like they're too big to bother listening to God. Sometimes they're more important, or they're too big to worry about little things like the law. Herod had gotten to the point where and as we read about Herod, he was a fabulous administrator. His building projects were astounding. His famine relief was superb. He continued to remain king in Jerusalem, though he's not Jewish. He's an Edomite off the southeast corner of Israel. He is able to maintain being king under successive Caesars. So he's along the lines of a political marvel as well as an administrative marvel. And yet towards the end of his life, he becomes extremely paranoid, to where he kills his 2 oldest favorite sons and kills his favorite wife. And so when we see Herod's response to the threat of a baby who will not have to become an adult and be declared king, when he hears of a baby that is born king, that means his place would immediately be usurped, at least in the hearts of the people, if not in Rome. Herod's response? Secretly find out what's going on, both from the teachers and priests, then from the Magi, and give the lie that please let me know exactly where he is and I will come worship him too. Where the section immediately follows, when he saw that the Magi fooled him and left the area by another road, he sent in an army and just killed all children under 2. Just slaughtered them. That was very common. In fact, the historians say that Herod had hundreds of Jewish leaders slated on a list that on the day he himself died, they were all to be put to death. That was how brutal Herod himself is. And so on one hand, you have these foreign dignitaries. Magi, in the time of Daniel, 500 years before Christ, in the time of Daniel, these are people with great standing in society, often great wealth and power. They had a specific high office. Through those 500 years, the term came to mean most anyone with a deep interest in astrology, in how astrology worked with magic, or books that discuss the future. All of that fell under this rubric of Magi. It's very, very difficult for scholars to pinpoint exactly what anyone would have seen around the time of Jesus' birth so that we know what the star looked like. Understanding that, these men whose life was the stars and magic, that in spite of how the Bible, God's direct word through his prophets, pushed aside and showed little honor and value to those who spent their life in astrology, God wanted you to seek God himself directly. These pagans from a far foreign land traveled hundreds of miles to give honor, homage to a child-born king when Israel's own king wanted him put to death. When Israel's own leaders could care less. They could give you the appropriate answer if you put them on the spot. But they were not seeking the king. So we understand that power can be an impediment. It can be a stumbling block to finding Jesus. But God worked to prepare those in power, whether in power directly in Israel, in power of the religion and the whole system of worship that was going on in Israel, or even in foreign countries. God was working. And we see in the story a hint that Jesus was in conflict later on with Pilate, again, a Roman appointee. Jesus ended up in conflict with the teachers of the law and with those who, teachers of the law and the high priests. But it was a centurion. It was the Greeks right at the end of his ministry. It was the common everyday people, like the people of Bethlehem, that welcomed their king. Paul told us, 1 Timothy chapter 2, to pray for all in authority. Let us pray for our leaders. Let us pray, as many of us have authority and significant influence, that we would be like the Magi, people who are seeking the king, who worship the king. Thank you for joining with me today.